Hey, so today we are diving into something really different. A pretty wild idea, actually. It's a new kind of language, one that's designed to help us navigate the, let's be honest, complete chaos of our modern information world. And the goal here isn't to find some kind of ultimate capital T truth. No, it's about something way more practical.
Let's just start with a feeling that I bet everyone watching this has had. You know, that feeling that the ground is just shifting under our feet, where disagreements don't just stay disagreements, they seem to spiral out into entirely separate realities that can't even talk to each other. Well, it's that exact feeling, that very problem, that this new system called MASLang is built to tackle. All right, here's our game plan for today. First, we'll talk about the crisis of truth we're all living through. Then, we'll get into the radical shift from looking for truth to looking for survival. We'll borrow a brilliant lesson from medicine to make it all make sense, break down the 3 filters used to test ideas, and then see how this all applies to the real world, like in politics and AI. And we'll wrap up by looking at what a future that is executable might actually look like.
Okay, so let's start with the problem itself. Academics have a term for it, epistemic fragmentation. But really, all that means is that the tools we've always counted on to figure out what's true, things like debate, facts, evidence, they feel like they're breaking down. It's gotten to the point where language itself isn't a tool for communication anymore, it's a battlefield.
And look, this goes way beyond just people having different opinions. We're talking about the very foundations of how we agree on things just crumbling away. The source material for this calls it symbolic exhaustion, a fancy term for when we can't even agree on what words mean, let alone what the facts are. Each worldview just ends up operating inside its own little bubble, with its own self-justifying logic. And that makes real conversation, well, pretty much impossible.
So what do you do if the old tools are broken? Well, this is where MASLang comes in with a really fundamental shift in thinking. It basically says, let's stop fighting this impossible war over what is true, and let's start asking a different question. What is durable? And this, right here, is MASLang. It's not another philosophy trying to sell you its version of the truth. It's a tool, a simulation engine. Think of it like a wind tunnel for ideas. You wouldn't ask if a new airplane design is true, right? You'd ask if it can fly. MASLang does the exact same thing for belief systems. It treats them like signals and then cranks up the pressure to see if they hold together, if they change, or if they just completely fall apart.
This question is everything. This is the big conceptual leap that makes the whole system work. What happens if we just sidestep that endless gridlocked debate about truth and instead run a much more practical test? Does it survive? This one change in perspective might just be the key to finding our way through this fractured world.
Now, I know this all sounds super abstract and theoretical, but stick with me, because there is this brilliant analogy from the world of medicine that makes this whole thing just click.
So picture this. You've got 20 different scientific studies on a brand new drug. A bunch of them say it's a miracle cure. Some say it does absolutely nothing. And a couple even say it's harmful. So what do you do with all that noise? Well, you do what's called a meta-analysis. You take all of that messy, contradictory data, you throw it all together, and you use statistics to find the real underlying signal. You find out if, when you look at the big picture, the drug actually works.
And this is where it gets really, really clever. MASLang takes that exact same logic from medicine and applies it directly to ideologies. So in medicine, your truth fragment is one single study. In MASLang, your truth fragment is an entire ideological doctrine. Think liberalism, conservatism, you name it. And the goal isn't to prove one is right and the others are wrong. The goal is to measure its signal coherence under stress, which is just like a doctor looking for a treatment effect. It's a method for finding the stable pattern hidden in all the ideological noise.
Okay, so we've got the big idea, but how does MASLang actually stress test an idea in practice? Well, it uses this really smart 3-part system called triadic validation. So every single belief, or every signal as it's called here, gets passed through 3 totally different filters. It's helpful to think of them as 3 different people asking, so is this idea any good? And those people are the scientist, the engineer, and the influencer.
Let's quickly break these down. First up, you've got the scientist filter. This one just asks a simple question. Is it verifiable? Can you prove it with facts or logic? Then comes the engineer's filter, which is all about practicality. It asks, does this idea actually do anything? Does it change things in the real world? And finally, you have the influencer's filter, which is about culture. It asks, does this idea catch on? Does it inspire people? Does it mobilize them? Now, here's the key. A durable belief doesn't have to pass all 3 filters, but its unique profile across these 3 tells you exactly how it's going to behave out in the wild.
So why go to all the trouble of building this incredibly complex system? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The research lays out two huge, real-world applications that take this from a cool theory and drop it right into the middle of today's biggest challenges: politics and artificial intelligence.
First up, politics. Instead of just seeing politics as a simple tug-of-war between left and right, MASLang lets us model it as a complex ecosystem of competing ideas, or signals. We can actually simulate how different political ideologies hold up under pressure, how they evolve and mutate, and why some ideas seem to thrive in chaotic times while others just completely collapse. It's a tool for understanding the deep game, not for picking sides.
Second application, AI. Now, we all know large language models are incredibly powerful, but they have a weakness. They're fragile. They can get really confused. They can hallucinate when they run into the messy, contradictory, illogical stuff that we humans create all the time. But by building an AI on top of MASLang, you could create a new kind of agent that's way more resilient. It wouldn't just be mimicking patterns from its training data, it would actually be able to simulate how different beliefs behave, making it a much more robust and, frankly, smarter thinker.
And that brings us to what is, for me, the most mind-bending part of this entire concept. We are moving toward a future where we don't just talk about social reasoning, we might actually be able to compute it.
Now, don't worry, you do not need to be a programmer to get this. This is just a little snippet of MASLang pseudocode. All it's really saying is that an action sends a signal into a system which causes a change in that system. The absolutely revolutionary idea here is that you can write down a belief system as a set of instructions, just like computer code, and then you can run it in a simulation to see what it does.
So what happens when you actually run these simulations? Well, the results showed something pretty dramatic and honestly deeply counterintuitive about how belief systems actually fail when you put them under stress.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the core logic. Survival is not a gentle downward slope. Belief systems can seem perfectly fine, totally stable, absorbing more and more stress, until they hit a critical threshold. And then, one tiny little bit of extra pressure can cause an instant, catastrophic, total collapse. It's not a ramp, it's a cliff edge.
So what this all really points to is a pretty profound shift in how we think. We're moving away from just arguing about ideas using rhetoric and moving towards what the paper calls executable epistemology. In plain English, that's the ability to build testable, runnable models of belief systems. It's a fundamentally new toolkit for understanding our world.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. As our world just keeps getting more complex, more fragmented, maybe the most important intellectual job isn't about finding some single universal truth anymore. Maybe it's about understanding, modeling, and even designing ideas and systems that are durable enough to actually survive the chaos.